So I'm assuming that all of you on this webinar here today, you know the basics of AI, meaning you probably have ChatGPT. You're probably using it in a business sense, in a professional sense, and you've started to kind of see some benefits from using AI. I don't know if you're like me, but a lot of my work around AI at a productivity level really is focusing on efficiency, trying to think about how I can use chat and other technologies to really make me more efficient in my job. But there's a limitation with AI that we have conceived of it right now. I'm sure you're like me. You've got an email, right? And you've opened up your email and you said, I need to formulate a response back to this email. So you run across to ChatGPT and you say, help me write an email that corresponds to this particular message and make it sound like me. I'm sure you've done something like that. But what's the problem? The problem is that once you write that email, you have to take and copy it from ChatGPT and paste it back into Outlook and then, or in your platform, and then maybe configure it a bit, or maybe using Gemini, and you have to kind of play with it a bit. Well, what's the next step? The next step is what's stopping the AI from just not only writing the email, but sending the email. That shift is the shift in agentic AI. So as we start, the way to think about agentic AI is AI that acts. So if we think about this from a definition perspective, what is agentic AI? Agentic AI is a capability of AI where the technology system independently can set goals, plan actions, and execute tasks. Now, let's stop there for a moment. So we know that it's a capability. What do we mean by a capability? Well, that means that even within the platforms that we currently have, we're seeing the future in which we're extending our current AI systems to add in the ability to do the next step. What is the next step? It can set goals, plan an action, and execute a task. Now, keep in mind, what's the difference? With ChatGPT now, if you're using it, it doesn't have the ability to execute the task and to plan out the action. It will tell you what to do, but it won't necessarily do it for you, and execute tasks with minimal human oversight. So let me give you another example to make it more clear. A few weeks ago, my wife and I were planning a road trip, and we were going to go from Washington, D.C. to where we live in Louisiana. So what did I do? I said, ChatGPT, you know about me, plan the road trip. And it did. It did a great job. It said you just stop in Virginia at this location and Gatlinburg and Chattanooga. It planned the whole trip for me. What did it not do? It didn't book the hotels, tell me the routes to take, tell me how to map it out. It didn't do those things. It had the ability to tell me what to do, but it couldn't do it for me. What if we took it one step further? You know that I'm a Hilton member, book Hilton hotels in that way. That's the next step. I give it the goal, and it can figure out how to execute the task and actually do what I ask it to do with minimal human oversight. The way that it does this, it's acting as an agent, as a tool, rather than a tool. The difference between an agent and a tool is an agent is proactive. It can do things for you. A tool can only respond to what you ask of it. The reason why it's so different is it understands context, reasoning, and it can adapt to new information. So we kind of have this big picture, right? Well, let's kind of position agentic AI from a historical perspective to understand why this is such a new phenomenon. If we look back at the long arc of AI, really this is the fourth era of AI. So let's talk through what those four eras have looked like. Now, in the 1950s, before I was born, we really had the first era of AI. A lot of people think, well, AI is a new phenomenon, but really that's not true. We really used rule-based systems, or you may have heard them as an expert system, in order to do AI in the 50s all the way up to the 90s. A rules-based AI operated under a series of conditions. If X happens, then do Y. If this happens, then execute that. It succeeded by having very explicit logic. You can almost think about it like a decision tree. Let me give you an example. So if for example, you use Google Flights, and you go to Google Flights and you say, if that flight falls below X number of dollars, then send me an email and say the flight has fallen in terms of the price. That's a rules-based or an expert systems. What's the benefit? It's very clear. You can understand it. And in very narrow context, it does make sense. The problems? Well, Those rules sometimes can be very hard to scale. And sometimes when it comes to making a decision, it's not so easy. It's a lot more complicated. And let's take another example. Let's say, for example, you're in the market for shopping for a car. Well, the rational side of us is going to say, well, it needs to be safe and it needs to have this much horsepower, and you got to work this often. So here's what you should get. But what's the problem? How do we buy cars? How it drives, how it feels, how it looks. You can't create a rule for that. And sure, you have many examples in your own work where you just can't create a rule or an algorithm to do what you're trying to do. So it has a hard time with ambiguity and with language. So what we saw and what we learned from this approach to AI was that we knew that we couldn't just send it out. We had to oversee it. We had to govern it. Well, as we moved into the 90s, we had the creation of machine learning. And as you know from going to Newstate, machine learning is where we learn patterns from data. So what we did is we took data, we dumped it into our repositories, and we used statistics and machine learning in order for us to understand basic relationship. And the way that we thought about AI is instead of rules, we used examples. What's the benefit? Well, in the case of complexity, it's a lot easier because these issues are more nuanced. So let's have an example, for example, and there's three here. Spam detection. How do we figure out if an email is spam? It's machine learning. If you train AI long enough, it'll detect spam versus non-spam. Churn prediction. Can we predict when customers are going to leave your organization? Or can we make recommendations to people? That's simply learning from structured data. The problem, this is again a very reactive approach. It's only looking for patterns of relationships. It's really good for classification. So for example, if you're going on Amazon and you said, people who buy this also buy that, that's machine learning. I can classify your behavior, but I still am not planning, and I still need the human to be there to execute the overall approach. So again, another example on Amazon, it says if you like books, if you like this book, you'll like that book. That's not agentic AI. Agentic AI says if you like this book, you'll like that book, and I'm going to buy it for you. Machine learning is inside that product. It's not operating from a broader perspective. So it really did help us to predict behavior, but again, it didn't automate or execute that. In 2012, we went from machine learning to deep learning. Now, to be clear, to make sure we understand this, machine learning is when we kind of understand the basic patterns that we're looking for. Deep learning says we really don't understand what we're looking for. We just want you to learn based on what you see in the data, and that's deep learning. So we took data, which was not structured, it was now unstructured. If you use ChatGPT, it was created by deep learning. So fundamentally, we're taking unstructured data, exposing it to these algorithms and trying to understand it. It was really good at really digging deep and understanding the nuance of what's happening. But the problem is deep learning wasn't trying to pursue a goal. It was just trying to understand what it saw in the data. You needed teams and training to understand what to do with that. And again, this is insight, but you really couldn't conversate the way we could with ChatGPT. So ChatGPT was era 3. So you see we went from rules to learning, machine, and then deep. And then we have where we are now, which is Gen AI and large language models. The approach here now is we're going to use a language way to look at intelligence. We all use ChatGPT, so we know the interface. We can have a conversation. We can explore the data. In your organization, you may have your own deployed AI solution with Azure or some other product, and you're just typing and you're conversating about it. The great part is strong, and you can go across domains, but the problem is that's still not being action-oriented. AI overall, we all know, have hallucinations. If you don't believe me, try asking AI answers to which the questions you already know. Ask it to tell you about the time that Einstein went to the moon. And a lot of AI systems, whether it be Grok or Claude, they don't know what they don't know, so they create hallucinations. And the problem is, just like that email example, great that you produce the text, but I still have to copy and paste it and move it over to my platform. So it did a really good job on creating content, but it didn't execute what we asked it to do. So now we're moving into agentic AI. This is a critical change. Now, not only are you asking it to write the email, you're asking it to send it for you on your behalf. It's now executing what you're asking it to do, and it's not simply responding. It's breaking down a goal into tasks. Think about that email. Write an email that corresponds to that. That means it has to break that down to understand the context, to understand your tone, to understand the email platform you're using, to go in, open up that email, write that email, and then send that email. So it requires planning, tools, understanding if something breaks along the way, verifying it, and maybe if things don't make sense, asking the human to still intervene. Now, keep in mind, it's easy to think, all right, I'm going to take this to its logical conclusion. So what Dr. Schwarz is arguing essentially is that eventually AI is just going to run everything. I am not saying that. Even though these tools can act, that action has to come within boundaries and guidelines and guardrails, and we'll talk about how you put those in. I'm not arguing for autonomous AI where AI comes and runs the organization, but if we think about use cases where this can happen, imagine the efficiency and productivity gains that can happen for that to take place. Because what it's unlocking is the ability to not just create the content, but to execute the workflow that you're envisioning. It's making sure that you can, your SOPs and your checklists and all that's happening at scale. And it also is making sure you have approvals and audits when needed. You're moving from AI that answers to AI that acts. How did we get here? What are the enablers that are moving us into agentic AI? Well, if we've seen the latest ChatGPT, I think it's 5.2 right now, we're seeing that reasoning is becoming stronger and stronger. It's becoming a whole lot better at decomposing tasks and following constraints and looking at steps. If you use ChatGPT, for example, you can upload files, you can integrate with Google, you can integrate with different tools. So even ChatGPT at the public level is allowing that to take place. Even cooler though, is what we're seeing is that the modernization of technology is that most platforms, they have APIs. Now, if you're not an IT person, what's an API? An API is simply a tool that allows different platforms to coordinate together. So most of your different platforms have an API that allow you to write to the data within that system. And by doing that, it also enables us to then have to execute these kind of tools within an AI solution. And most systems like ServiceNow or Zapier, they're all focusing on agentic AI as well. The other piece underneath of it, if you start to think about it and with you sort of decompose this, you need to be able to write the email, but then you need to have a tool that can go into Outlook or to Gmail that can make sure that you can open up those platforms, but they need to be orchestrated. So we're seeing more and more orchestration frameworks emerge to orchestrate that. Now, again, for those of you who remember, we had SOA, service-oriented architecture, a long time ago, and really SOA laid the foundation for this. It's the same kind of philosophy on the orchestration level. And organizations don't just want to use AI to write emails. They want it for a lot deeper kind of approaches as well. They want to see that automation that we're talking about here as well. So again, just to go back, agentic AI is a capability where it can independently set goals, plan, execute, and it's aware and adaptable. So if you want a formula, a real easy way to think about agentic AI, it's about goals, actions, and autonomy with guardrails. So really that framing gets you to sort of think about AI, and it allows you to distinguish between AI now and a generative AI as an alternative. Now, just to bring this out even clearer, what are we talking about? Let's talk about Gen AI versus agentic AI specifically. So with Gen AI, it's what it was focusing on is generating content. Agentic AI is achieving goals. Gen AI was producing answers. Agentic AI actually produces the tasks. Gen AI was focusing on language. Agentic AI planning and execution. Gen AI was a back and forth. I'm sure that you have go back and forth with chat. Agentic AI is multi-step workflows over time. You don't even need to use any external tools for Gen AI, but you do for agentic. For Gen AI, it's being responsive to you. For agentic AI, remember, it's planning and executing itself. And we'll have some examples as we go along further. With Gen AI, they may or may not verify you, but with agentic AI, we can audit and put steps in place to make sure that it's doing the right thing. With Gen AI, Yeah, if it's wrong, it could be not really a big impact. The risk, however, for agentic AI is since it's executing the task, there's actually a big impact if it goes wrong. So if we go back historically, what we're seeing here is that in era one, the rules, we were automating procedures, then we were automating predictions, then we we're automating communication, now we're automating action. So that explains those four different steps. So you're saying, okay, Dr. Schwarz, I kind of get it. You're using tools, you're doing action. I understand, but it's called agentic AI. What is an actual agent? So, an agent is a system that can decide what to do next to achieve a goal. Now, agents in and of themselves are not necessarily new. We've had agents for a long time. For example, let's go back to the Google Flights example that we had before. You could actually set a trigger inside of Google Flights that says, if that flight falls below a certain level, go ahead and buy my airline tickets. Cool. Now, that is an agent. Now, how is that different from agentic AI? Because it was rules based. If this, then that. But philosophically, it's still doing what you asked it to do. Let me give you another example to understand that. A number of years ago, when the very first Harry Potter book came out, it was very, very popular. So it was around Christmas time, and a lot of parents were trying to get the book from Amazon. The problem was it kept selling out. So what some parents did is they created an agent, and that agent polled Amazon. Essentially, it said, Amazon, is the book ready? No. Is the book ready? No. Is the book? So it kept asking every few seconds whether or not the book was available. Well, Amazon got annoyed because it was tapping into their infrastructure. And what did they do? They blocked the agent. Well, the agent figured it out and figured out a way around that. See, it had a goal and it figured out how to execute that goal. So, what an agent can do is to break down the goal into steps, figure out what tools to work, verify if it worked, and if it doesn't, bring a human into the loop and remember what it did over time. Now, this is not general intelligence. Keep in mind, these agents are acting in very narrow contexts. It doesn't mean it's on autopilot. It has to have constraints on it. It can definitely be wrong, and it'll be confident about being wrong as well. And it's never a replacement for governance, security, and accountability, meaning we're not taking the human out of the loop. All right, so we know where it comes from. We know kind of how agents work. Let's get a little bit more specific. How does an agentic AI actually work? It's a 5-step process. Let's step through these 5 steps. Step 1, agentic AI begins by understanding the task. What it does is before it acts, it takes the request, it frames it, and then it confirms the boundaries under which it operates. So you're going to say, here's the goal. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Here's the constraints. Here's what you need to use. Here's the ambiguity. And before beginning, agentic AI will make sure that it understands what it's trying to do. So at that point, it then steps away from that interaction with you and it breaks that goal into a series of subtasks and it figures out what it needs to, tools it needs to accomplish the task. It then says what level of autonomy. Now remember, I said, we're not simply saying that this should be autonomous on its own. You can have different levels of autonomy. Now, there's a couple levels we'll get into, but for example, you could say, I suggest you do this. Do you want me to do that? Or you could say, do it, just tell me what you did. Or don't do anything, just make suggestions for what I should do. So there's different levels of autonomy here. Now, the cool thing about AI as well is as with time, it's going to be able to anticipate why something will fail and tell you why it's failed. So behind the scenes, what AI is doing is figuring out the plan. What tools do I need? What do I need to do? In what order do I need to do them? Step 3, do it. Calling the tools, using these APIs, figuring out how to do. Now, for all of you in cyber, you're sitting there thinking about the cyber risk for sure, I'm sure, right? But agentic AI tends to follow the least privilege principle, which is only give it what it needs in order to execute. If you use AWS, for example, an agent could be another user with certain types of credentials and certain type of roles and responsibilities for it to execute that you can set for it. It's going to go ahead and execute it. and it's going to go about giving you a log of what it accomplished. If it fails, it's going to figure out how to overcome that. Unless it can't, in which case it's going to bring the human back into the loop again. So you told it what to do. It's figured out how to do it. It's now executed. Step 4, did it do it correctly? So it's going to validate that against why you asked it to do it. And make sure that you did it correctly. Make sure that it's accurate. You can even ask it for like a confidence to say, how confident are you that you did what you're supposed to do? And you're going to get a report. The agent is going to check, did I just do what you asked me to do? Now, what if I'm wrong? Cool. At that point, it's going to either revise the plan or it's going to escalate it to a human. It's going to, if there's actions which are maybe irreversible, like making a huge commitment to on a payment, it will stop there and to make sure that it's right. It's going to learn. It's going to adjust to reality. It's going to involve the human when it's needed, and it's going to make sure that it completes this responsibly. Now, why is agentic AI such a big deal right now? And the reason is the tools. Without the tools, we have to keep AI embedded in text. With the tools, we can move beyond the text to actually complete the workflow. Now, the downside, there's more capability, there's more risk. So we have to make sure that we keep permission structures in place that we can make sure that the agents are acting correctly. So some examples, I can use email, calendars, CRM, ticketing systems, database, analytics, document. Any API or any tools that you can think of can be used within the context of agentic AI in order for it to execute the workflow that you need to accomplish. So I gave you the example of an email. I gave you the example of Google Flights. Let's take it one step further and let's talk about an agentic AI in action, and let's see what happens with our 5 steps. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but one of the biggest struggles that I have is scheduling meetings. You have 5 different people and you're trying to figure out, how do I get all these people at the same time in the same place? And we have these big doodle polls and you spend all this time figuring out pros and cons of this person versus that person. And then you got to do an agenda and they have to do an email. And oh my, we know how much work this is. Well, why not use an agent? All right, agentic AI, I want you to go out and check all the calendars and tell me when we should meet. Based on that, schedule an agenda, send them the email with options, create the calendar event, update the CRM. You see how agentic AI could actually be designed in a way to take the friction off of this approach. Imagine AI going into the calendars and where they have people blocked off, finding the commonality between 5 people, then schedule that meeting, putting on everyone's calendars, understanding context enough to know what that meeting is about, creating an agenda for you and emailing it then to you. Think about what the impact of that to you and your efficiency and your productivity. Now, you're no longer focusing on those day-to-day mundane tasks. You're now focusing on those higher level tasks. But also think about that deeper. What tools are we requiring? I'm requiring to use multiple email platforms, potentially, if they're not the same as mine, multiple calendaring systems. I need to be able to understand who the client is. So I may need to go into my Salesforce instance to get information about the client. I may need to look at notes from other people about this client as well. So you can start to unwrap the complexity involved with this as well. And that's a very easy example. What if we go even further? What if we have to have multiple agents? Well, that's going to require more roles. And so the way that organizations are thinking about agentic AI is by creating very narrow agents focused on very specific use cases. So, for example, what if you're creating an app or an AI solution focused on health? You could have one agent that focuses on understanding a question that a person would have about their health. You could have another one focused just on diabetes. So you can break down it into a series of very small agents, and you can create these multi-agent teams. All right. So, for example, if I'm sure you're like in your job, your VPs or your executives will say, go do research on a new market or a go-to-market strategy. Well, you can have a research agent that does that. You could then, not only that, but you could create another agent that then takes all that information and creates reports based upon it. You say, well, ChatGPT does that. Oh, it does. But imagine if your use cases were even more narrow so that it could actually understand it at a deeper level. It could check, you have a verification agent checking for if it's right or wrong. You can have an execution agent. So you can see, just like we design your organizations by separation of roles and responsibilities, we're doing the same thing with AI. Think about AI a bit differently. We tend to think about our organization structures in terms of division of labor, right? Accounting does that, marketing does this. Start to think about AI in the same way and agents in the same way. This agent does this agent does that. Why? Because then you can repurpose that agent for multiple purposes as well. It's reusable. So what we're talking about is orchestrating an entire organization based upon agents. It's almost like creating a project team where you have to have someone in charge of research, someone's a writer, someone's in charge of quality. Same thing here, breaking it down into a series of smaller tasks. Now, what are the different stacks, the technologies that relate to agentic AI? Now, I'm not going to take ownership over this. I'm actually thought this was pretty cool. This actually came from OpenAI and ChatGPT. As I started to put together this presentation and talk about the layering, they created this for me, which I was impressed with and just had to brag about that for a moment. So what are the technologies that go into the agentic AI stack? Let's talk about them one at a time. The first is, how does work enter the agentic AI? The way that it enters is maybe through a chat, through a form, through email, through Slack, through voice, through a dashboard. All those are ways, and just like traditional AI, but look, we're expanding it further because we're not simply saying it has to only be chat or an interface. Now we're opening it up to other types of platforms as well. It can be scheduled, it could be event driven, schedule. Let's say you run a hotel, for example. We know that about 3 or 4 in the morning, we have to close the books, we have to reopen the books. It happens every night. I can schedule an agentic AI system to run at a specific time to execute that. It could be event driven. Once this happens, then do that. And you're saying, well, that sounds like a rule. You could automate it based on conditions. So all those are the triggers that start agentic AI. Once the trigger occurs, the agent is going to frame the task, figure out what it needs, and ask you what it's allowed to do or not allowed to do. As you're designing your agentic AI, you want to make this as clear as possible so the agent knows when it should step in. All right, so we know when I should start. What else do I need to do? Well, I need to orchestrate this. So let's say that you go into Gen AI and you say, write an email that does X, Y, Z. You're going to know that an agentic AI system is going to say, well, I need an email platform, I need a Gen AI platform, I need all those platforms. So the second part is orchestration. An agent for orchestration is going to figure out what tools and what agents need to do what and in what order they need to do it. We have a policy in there that's going to say, here's how it should happen. And we're going to determine how level of autonomy. You're going to set this up beforehand so that it's going to operate based upon the conditions you give to it. And you can give it limits. If you're afraid, only execute this 10 times or 15 times. Here's when you stop. Here's when the human should be consulted. Orchestration prevents it from running autonomously without your intervention. Next level. So we see we need triggers, we need orchestration, we need a model. Now, one of the cool things about this as well is maybe you don't use ChatGPT. Maybe you want to use Azure. Maybe you want to use Copilot. Maybe you use Claude. You can determine which Gen AI system you want to use. But it has to be able to understand what to do and break into the subtask and know what tools to choose as well. So the model is really the agent. The reliability, however, comes from all the agents around it. All right, the next element here in our stack, number 4, tools. These is where we go about doing what we said. CRMs, ERPs, emails, calendars. I integrate that with API or webhooks or SQL. I can even say I can only read my database, or I can write to the database, or I can execute it. What we're focusing on here is actually taking those actions. So we have triggers, we have orchestrations, we have models, we have tools. What else do we need? Memory. We need to remember what we asked to do. how we remember we have agents that are doing a series of different things and we're orchestrating them. Well, someone's got to remember if we're doing the right thing. So we need to have short-term memory to make sure that the agent's doing what it's supposed to, that one agent is, but you also need long-term memory that makes sure that we're learning over time all those workflow patterns. And if I ask you, Agentic AI, how are things going, you need to be able to figure that out and personalize it based upon the question I'm asking of it. So without keeping in mind this memory and this state, agent's just going to reset and do the same thing every time and not learn. So we have to have memory. And again, that's the difference between rules-based expert systems and agentic AI. Remember, rules-based AI just executed if X, then Y. Here we're learning, because what can happen over time with agentic AI is I can find that maybe I need to do things differently and I can learn and adapt. The last element of agentic AI is logging, auditing, and monitoring. I need to be able to keep track of what went well, what didn't go well, why did it go well, not go well, test it out, audit it, and figure out to make sure, is it reliable? All right, so these are the 6 different aspects of agentic AI. So how do they work in practice? Let's have an example. Let's pretend you work in IT. And we all know that if you have an IT problem, you put a ticket in. Well, let's pretend we're using agentic AI. The interface, the ticket arrives. So someone's having a problem with their computer. That triggers an agent. The agent says, all right, let me look at this request. How much of a priority is? What is our policy? Now, we all know that there's a difference in the different types of IT system tickets we put in. You being locked out of your account for your email is different than my computer's not working, or it's different than some other problem, like I need to get new software installed on my computer. That orchestration engine is going to analyze the request, figure out how important it is, and then figure out what to do about it. The model will then plan out the steps to take. The tools will then figure out what APIs or what tools need to be put out. Memory, we need to keep track of the steps we've taken, and we need to log them as well. So we can see here how all of these 6 different elements of agentic AI all work together. All right, so it sounds like there's the opportunity here for agentic AI basically to run on its own. And that is indeed true. But we all know, as we said, we need to keep the human in the loop. So how much autonomy should you give to agentic AI? Overall, there's 4 levels of autonomy. At the very base level, you could do suggest only. This is similar to what we have right now with Gen AI. So you go into your ChatGPT, ask it to do something, and it's going to give you a suggestion as what you're going to do. Again, autonomy at level 0 means I don't trust the agent to make that decision. Example, let's think about something like healthcare. If you really want agentic AI in healthcare, do you really want an agent or an AI system to order your blood work? Probably not. So you want it to suggest to the doctor. So you could have agentic AI make a suggestion and then have the doctor say yes or no. Now that's not rules-based because you're still learning over time. Level 1, execute with approval. That says, hey, I think that blood work should be ordered of this type. Do you agree? Yes. Then it goes. So in the first one, it doesn't do any actions. The second one, it does. Level 2. Level 2 says, I've gone ahead and ordered the blood work. I'll just letting you know. Level 3 says, I've executed it, I've logged it, but no one knows that I did it except the log inside the system. So you see at every single step of autonomy, there's different levels that correspond with it. The recommendation, if you're just starting out with agentic AI, start on level 1, because you need to be able to approve things. Now, over time, what you will find is you'll become more comfortable. But what you're doing is you're keeping the human in the loop. You're not creating a bottleneck here. And we have to be clear, this is not about creating an extra layer to make things slow. What you're doing is you're making sure that the agent is acting as you want it to act. Where are the most important areas to keep the human in the loop? Money is number 1. Money. The last thing you want to do is check your bank account and see that your agentic AI completely made you bankrupt. 2, a contract. You don't want trust and AI only to look at the contract and sign it. You're going to want to keep a human in the loop. 3rd, customer facing. I'm sure if you're like me, you've hopped onto the chatbot when you're booking an airline or working at Etsy or Amazon, and Amazon in particular, I think it's Rufus, right? You ask some questions, they give you an answer back. Well, that's not so bad. That's customer facing. But I'm sure you've had the example where you correspond with Amazon and they say, well, hold on, I can't do that. I need an agent. For example, I'd returned a product, I returned the wrong one. Well, the AI couldn't fix that. It needed a human. So you can put a human in the loop there. Medical, things that are novel. What about something where the AI has never seen before? Well, rather than having it execute, you could have it stop and ask you what to do. If you want an example, think about a driving car. If you've been to San Francisco, you know that if you have a Waymo, what happens if that driving car hits a scenario that it's never encountered before? It just stops. Same idea here of keeping the human in the loop. So what are some best practices? You need to make sure that you understand the agent's plan. Only put approvals where it's possible, escalate when needed, and always record these decisions. Humans, again, are not the bottleneck. Now, what's the motivation? Why are businesses going involved with agentic AI? Well, some easy value drivers: time saved, cycle reduction, lower errors, higher capacity, improved customer service. These are all very clear value propositions that link to some quantifiable benefit. But what's the advice as you're starting out? This is very new. So don't expect to see these huge business value propositions early on. Go slow. Start with something small and bounded where you can clearly define when it's done. Measure, 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 and start with very low levels of autonomy and increase them once you have confidence in the agentic AI itself. So what kind of KPI should I use? Well, 3 basic buckets: operational metrics, quality metrics, and adoption metrics. Operational, we just went through. Quality, reworks, completion, customer satisfaction. Adoption metrics, who's using it? How much are they using it? My tip, only 3 to 5 KPIs per pilot. You don't have to pick one from every category, but you do have to have a KPI because that's going to give you the ability to see if your agentic AI was successful or not. And what you may find is that your KPI may need to shift over time based upon how you go about creating these orchestration engines. Now, what I want to do is I want to talk through that value creation process in some very specific ways. So I want to talk about 5 specific agentic AI use cases so you can begin to conceive of how you think agentic AI can be used in your organization. So let's talk through those 5. 1, operations, ticket triage, ticket routing, compliance with SOP, onboarding vendors, report generation. These are things that are high frequency, high volume, repeatable, structured. These are things that you do consistently every single time the same way. Think about your SOPs. These are great examples of where agentic AI can come in. If they're wrong, not a lot of risk. But the cool part, if you could take those high volume workflows and automate them, what you'll find is true, clear KPIs and value that'll allow you to dig further. And if you begin your agentic AI journey by designing AI agents to be reusable, just because they're usable in operations, they may be able to use in other areas as well. So the objective in operations is, how do I smooth my workflow to make it more effective? 2, customers and revenue. This one we have to be careful about. For example, how do I qualify a lead? How do I figure out what I should do next with that lead? Maybe I can help it to write a proposal. After a sale, if my customers need to do a series of steps, how do I nudge them to do it correctly? All those are examples of how I can accelerate the growth. But the problem is this is still your customer. Now, what we do know is only about 10% of customer-facing processes truly add value to the customer. That means that 90% of what you do in your company that you ask of your customers is actually deteriorating and actually as a negative value for the customers as well. Easy example. Think about calling in on the phone and dealing with people on the phone. Press 1 for this, press 2 for that. That's an example of something that really is ripe for agentic AI to take over and understand it better. The problem is if it executes it, you have the potential of losing the interaction with the customer. So you have to log everything and make sure that if there's uncertainty, that the human still does get involved. All right, so operationally, I can make my workflow more efficient. Customers and revenue. How can I use AI to smooth the customer experience and potentially upsell or create additional value as well? Third, finance. Invoices, spend authorization, auditing, looking for potential fraud. All those are examples of things I could use from agentic AI. The problem is this is an area where you need a lot of control over what it does. You can't allow it to then potentially identify fraud and then take the next step of making an accusation based upon it. You need to make sure that you have thresholds. Moving money, you need to make sure that you have approval for that and who did what, making sure you can trace everything, making sure that you're evaluating everything correctly. Number 4, IT and analytics. Oftentimes, what you'll find is that the very first agentic AI system that's used is inside of IT. Why? Because IT has their systems already ready for agents already. So, example, we said a ticket earlier example, knowledge bases, self-service, documentation. We already, from IT's already got a lot of their systems already set up with APIs, so they kind of can lean into that. So a lot of times, if you're looking for the very first example, while we know that customers don't add value in the processes, IT is usually ready to start as well. Last one, HR and learning. Think about your learning platforms. And think about all the different trainings you have to do for HR. How can you make them better? What about interviewing scheduling, like we just talked about? All these are ways in which I can enhance my HR and learning. I will give you one, however, note of caution, which is, as we all know, AI is biased. So we have to make sure that there's not bias in my agentic AI as well, and that I'm making sure that if there are cases that need to be escalated, I always keep the human in the loop. So we kind of see now how agents can operate together. The next step you're going to say is, all right, Dr. Schwarz, I want to get started. I want to open up ChatGPT because I see agent mode. That's agentic AI, right? It is not. So let's talk a little bit about agent mode in ChatGPT. Now, agent mode in ChatGPT is a little different. It does actually help me to begin to assign a goal. It can help you plan and execute the steps, but I will warn you, however, agent mode still isn't strong enough in that it does not have the ability to execute the tools yet because they haven't been embedded within the platform. But it does help you. If you do click on that, it'll help you on the processes that exist prior to execution. So it'll help you to understand, to plan, and to check. So the way that you use agent mode in AI is you create a prompt. So, for example, there's one down below. You are my agent. Create a webinar. Now, you say, well, okay, Dr. Schwarz, you're giving us a webinar. That must meant that you did this. No, I did not. As a matter of fact, this is all my work. I didn't use AI to produce this. But you could, for example, do that. You're my agent, and here's the goal. You give it the constraints, you give it the steps, you give it the output. Well, if you're going to do all that, why do you AI? Because AI can help you to do each of these different things. So it can give you workflow orchestration, research, writing, project coordination, teaching. But keep in mind that agent mode still isn't executing. What is it doing? It's helping you to execute without you having to do a lot of prompts. If you use the structure of the prompt, it's very clean, it's fast, it's consistent. And if you're consistent with that prompt structure, what you will find is that it gives you repeated workflows and it's going to be very consistent in the output. The problem, however, of that mode is, again, it's still not integrated. So what you're seeing when you use agent mode in ChatGPT is the precursor to agentic AI. And most analysts believe that where they're headed is to get us comfortable with agent mode so that when they introduce other integrations, we'll be able to move forward. So for example, you're starting seeing integration with like Google Drive to upload documents. The next step of that is when they expose Gmail, so where they can about doing that. The other limitation is it does still make assumptions because it still is a Gen AI platform. It can't really give you a confidence level or tell you the problems. There's no levels of security. Whatever you allow is what's going to happen. And it's not always on. If you ask Gen AI to send you a reminder, it likely won't, because it's not set up to be an agentic AI system. So What are the best practices if you do want to use AI agent mode in ChatGPT? One, make sure that you add verification. Two, ask for sources. Three, make sure you use human work approval. And four, create a custom GPT so you can use it again and again. So there is value here. So when we look at the value of it, if we look at autonomy and risk, you see that there's different types of ways that you can use agent mode in ChatGPT. The rule of thumb is look for areas which are low risk that can give you the ability to be successful, that can also require low levels of autonomy. And that's what you should automate first and then go from there. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about each of these categories, but this is a good framework for you to begin to think about areas that you want to create agentic AI and figure out where they should go. All right, so let's say that you use this tool and you begin to think about it. What next? Well, next you need to begin to think about, how do I choose my first pilot? So what's a good first pilot? Clear inputs, clear outputs, clear stops, clear levels of success. It's easy to know if it's wrong. It's very repetitive and they have an API. What not to do for your first pilot. Don't do anything high stakes. Don't run your entire organization on agentic AI until you learn how. Pilot it. Make sure that you know where you're headed. I was talking to someone that was talking about using AI, and I said, what's your success metric? And he said, I just want to make it better. And that's not a good answer. You need to have clear metrics and clear outcomes of what you're trying to achieve. If there's no tools the agent can't act, you don't need agentic AI. If it's political or a high likelihood it's going to fail, don't use agentic AI, because these tools, while they've improved, are still not all the way there yet, because there's still risks. We still have the potential for hallucination. The tool could be set up wrong. It could be that the agent goes too far in their permission structure, that you can't stop checking it. You can't do anything with it. So we have to be very careful, and we have to put guardrails in place. And those guardrails can include access, meaning I only allow certain roles to access these tools. I only allow these kind of safe approaches, or these safe kind of things that we can do. I'm going to put approval gates in there. I'm going to make sure that people don't use it too much. Those are access-based. Or I can say, I want to verify it. I want to make sure that we're successful. I want to put logs in place. So you can see that you should be putting guardrails in place in order for you to move forward agentic AI. So we know now the basics of it. We know where we could go. We know how to pilot it. What's a roadmap inside your organization? Let's say you're sitting back and you say, all right, I get it. Where do I start? Identify your pilot. Look for 2 to 3 pilots that are very easy to define, in which there's clear outcomes and you can clearly execute it. Make sure that you have the tools and permission. Make sure you understand the risk. So begin by identifying very clearly which workflows that you want to go to. Number 2, build, evaluate, implement it, sandbox it, create test cases. Third, roll it out. Use a small launch, iterate, figure out what to do. Then lastly, and only when you go through that, figure out if it's working or not. Pivot, expand, and move from there. This is an area in which you need to have a lot of strategic experimentation in order for you to be successful. All right. As we draw to a close here today, I want to give you 5 ideas to remember, 5 things to take away about agentic AI. Number 1, agentic AI is goal-driven in tool using. Generative AI did not use action. Agentic AI does. So, number 1, agentic AI executes. Number 2, most value of agentic AI is going to come from your ability to integrate your workflow, not from a clever prompt. You see a shift here. So really the era we're in now is about prompt engineering and learning the prompts, and that will still continue to be true. But the skills that you learned to create prompts aren't the skills of agentic AI. Agentic AI is about workflow integration and not about prompts. Number 3, you need to understand governance, autonomy, and guardrails. We are not turning our organization over to AI. We're not simply saying, you're in charge, go. No, the human must be in the loop. You need governance. You need to decide how much autonomy you're going to give your agents and what guardrails they need to operate within. Number 4, start with something measurable, a measurable pilot, and a clear KPI. Make sure you know where you're headed. And lastly, once you become successful, go slow, be responsible, adapt your metrics, adapt your tools, increase your autonomy. This is the next step in AI. And agentic AI is going to be fundamentally important. Now you're saying, okay, I get it. I'm here at Newstate and I want to expand myself and I want to grow myself. How do I get ready for the agentic AI revolution as an employee? You've already taken the first step by beginning to understand agentic AI. What should you do next? Look around. Start to look in your organization and identify potential use cases for agentic AI. Where could it be used? How could it be used? Start to think about your own job. What can you do in your job where an agent could be effective? Experiment yourself. There's tools, there's platforms, there's approaches. Experiment with agent mode in ChatGPT and see what you can do. So begin to experiment, identify those use cases yourself, and begin to pilot and experiment. AI is such an exciting time, and right now it's such an exciting time to be in AI. So I encourage you to experiment and try and play, because we never know where we're going to go, but the future ahead is so bright. Thank you again for joining me today. I appreciate it. And I'd be happy to have, if you have any further questions, just feel free to reach out via email. I'd be happy to discuss this further. Thank you so much.